Hey everybody, welcome to Politex. I'm looking forward to another great show. I have two special guests. One of my House colleagues, Representative Donna Howard from Austin, Texas. She chairs the Texas House Women's Caucus, Women's Health Caucus. I also have San Antonio columnist Gilbert Garcia, has been writing about politics for a long time in San Antonio. We're going to talk about the special election in the 118 here in San Antonio. If you have something, you want to comment, you want to reach out to me about future idea for the show, you can always follow me on social media at TMFTX on both Facebook and on Twitter, TMFTX. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Politex. Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm pleased to have my next guest. This is Gilbert Garcia. He writes a column for the San Antonio Express News. He's also been a reporter, has been in journalism a long time. And Gilbert, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
Hey, listen, I don't think anybody knows this, but the fact that I have a podcast is really all your fault. If you remember, I went on your podcast. And I told you and I told Brian and others that y'all needed to come to the Capitol and set up your podcast to go live from the Capitol, and none of you ever took me up on it. So I said, well, if you guys aren't going to do it, I'm going to do one. And
it was a great idea. Yeah, we should have done it.
You should have done it, man. Listen, when you told me about the equipment that you needed to have a decent podcast, I was like, man, we can do all this. And in fact, I think we got technical support from one of your producers that gave us a tip on what to buy and what kind of gadgets we needed and so forth. So we got to give a shout out to your production crew for getting us online, man. And we may not be as good as your pod.
Oh, I don't know about that.
But you know what? We have a lot of fun with it. And so listen, you wrote a really interesting piece that I read over the weekend regarding the 118, which is a state house district in the south of San Antonio.
Yeah.
I think your title or your theme was that John Lujan was the king of special elections. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what you meant by that and kind of how you see the race being different from the last time Representative Lujan was in a special election?
Well, as you know, I mean, District 118 has been so dominated by Democrats over the years, and you've had some really prominent people in that seat from, Ciro Rodriguez and Frank Tejeda and Carlos Uresta, Joe Farias, and John Lujan's been the one person who's been able to break that sort of domination, but he's only done it in special election runoffs. And I think that my sense was, and I would think probably a lot of maybe you and some of your colleagues shared this view when he won in January 2016. I thought, well, he's probably not going to be able to hold this seat for very long. And sure enough, he was voted out in November of that year and didn't get to serve in a legislative session. I think this time it's a little more questionable because, as you know, and you were right there in the front lines with these redistricting issues, and this is not as going to be as blue a district as it was before. I mean, and I'm curious to get your take on this, but I mean, it seems like it's more of a swing district now than it was before, and he certainly seems optimistic. I mean, of course, you would expect that from him, but he got some support from House Speaker Dade Phelan, from Governor Greg Abbott. Certainly, their ability to put a Latino Republican in office in San Antonio is something that they were wanting to do, and that they would love to be able to keep him there. So he's not going to lack for resources or support. And I think that the map is going to, if it holds up through this legal process, I think it's going to be more conducive for him.
Yeah, no, those are good points. And, let's, rewinding a little bit. I think it's fair to say that in San Antonio, especially on the Democratic side, we don't do our best work in special elections. I mean, special elections are weird. The timing is weird. The governor has a lot of control, and the governor will use that control to bring an advantage to his side or his team. And so in this election, I don't know if you were aware of it, or I didn't see it reported, but that it was alleged and with substantial facts that John Lujan's campaign knew exactly when the runoff date was going to be by at least a couple of weeks. It gave him a couple of week advantage to campaign. There was also some allegations raised from the Frank Ramirez campaign, you know, there were even, difficulties in terms of the person who lived in the South Side of San Antonio. When they voted early, you had to effectively vote with two different ballots,
That's
one
right.
for the constitutional amendment and one for the race. And so just to pile on the nuance of special elections, this one seemed to be a little bit harder. And despite that, and despite all the money that Lujan had at his disposal, backing of the governor, the backing of the Republican Speaker of the House, I think he squeaked this one out by 300 votes.
That's right. Well, I wanted to on the issue of whether he knew in advance, and this is the kind of thing that I can't say for certain what the situation was. I did talk to him, and I did a column a few weeks back about that issue, and what John Lujan said, and again, I can't say whether this is the case or not, but he said that he, looking at the fact that there was going to be this constitutional amendment election on November 2nd, and he thought this is going to be the date for the District 118 race. And so he told some people on his team, let's do some flyers, let's do a small run that put the date on there so that we can kind of get a jump on our, the opposition and take a chance. He said his team said, oh, this is, they thought it was a bad idea. And then eventually he said they ended up encouraging him to even do more. But he said it was a limited run, and he did it in certain North Side neighborhoods where he thought that he, would do particularly well. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't say, I have no way of knowing if somebody on the governor's team gave a call to somebody in his team, said, hey, you might want to look for November 2nd. That's the kind of thing I can't say. But that was a factor. And as you said, and the governor was aware of this, creating an election where you're going to have constitutional amendments and District 118, people have to vote separately. People have to literally vote and then get back in line and vote for the other race. It's very confusing to people, and that's not conducive to democracy.
Right. And listen, it's a fair point that you raise about what Lujan, what his version of the facts are. And look, I don't know John. He seems like a nice guy. I look forward to meeting him, and for the time that he's a rep, we're going to work together as we do, as the delegation often does, both Republicans and Democrats. But I'll say this: I mean, you can't be the favorite and have Governor Abbott supporting you politically, having the Speaker of the House supporting you politically, having the Republican establishment 100% behind you, and you not get a little bit of a wink and a nod as to how things happen politically. It doesn't happen that way. I've been in special elections. I've worked with people in special elections, and trust me, there are things that you can learn, and there are insights that you can make your own conclusions. And so all of that being said, I think we all agree that voters having to get in line twice in the South Side of San Antonio to vote is wrong and could have been prevented. I think what also could have been prevented is if you live in the South Side of town, let's say, and you work here in the medical center, and you decide to go on your lunch hour to vote early at Wonderland Mall, which has been a early vote site, for 1,000 years. You should have been able to go to Wonderland and get a ballot to vote for John Lujan or Frank Ramirez, and you couldn't. And so the only way you could vote early in the 118 is you had to go to a voting center in that district, which even made it just a little bit more harder for folks to vote. And so, but despite all that, look, the 118 numbers were very, very high. There was tremendous turnout in the 118 relative to that same turnout for the constitutional amendment races. And so that shows that people were paying attention to this race. Just John came out on top in this round.
And I had a question for you on this because I don't know the answer to this, but obviously on the same night that we had the District 118 election, we had races in Virginia and New Jersey. Democrats hung on to the governor's office in New Jersey by a slim margin, maybe closer than expected, and a Republican, Glenn Youngkin, won in Virginia. And so there are all kinds of theories out there about what's going on in the electorate. We're still away from the midterms, but a lot of theories about what's going on. And I don't know that there was that much talk about how all those dynamics came into play in District 118. And I really don't know how much they came into play. But I'm curious to see what you think about that.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I saw some national reporting where, John had mentioned that this was just good timing with the national atmosphere. And, I'm not so sure. And I wasn't on those doors every day. I wasn't in the trenches of the campaign, so, it's hard for me to give a firsthand account, but I just think generally speaking, history has said that San Antonio Democrats don't do well in special elections. It didn't work out very well. When I tried it, didn't work out well in 2016 when the 118 was a special election. It didn't work out well for the Democrats then. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm getting old, Gilbert, but I believe wasn't the Roland Gutierrez Senate race was a special election as well.
That's right, 2018, yeah.
And that didn't work out well either. And so, special elections are tough. You pile on with the atmosphere of what's going on nationally. I don't think it's of any more importance than the atmosphere that we already have in this state, which is, a governor who refuses to help during a pandemic and uses the emergency disaster powers that he has to actually make things worse and not better, to prohibit governments from having mask mandates, to prohibit schools from having vaccine mandates, to do everything we can to promote health and safety based on science. I think that overall our economy seems to be doing pretty okay in San Antonio. There are jobs for people who can and are willing to work. We seem to we have a little bit of cost increase with inflation, but relative to the country, I think it's within norms, and people who are buying and selling homes are still buying and selling homes at record levels. And so I think our local economy is not, as bad as the rest of the country. I don't think we've seen, the supply shortages in our retail establishments in places like HEB and places where you go for your shopping. But that's not to say that that's not on the minds of folks. Is there some general disappointment about here we control, the presidency and the Congress, but yet we can't seem to get, any movement on national reforms? I share in that. I'm disappointed. So I imagine, everybody else is too. But I don't think that trickles all the way down to the south side of San Antonio in 1/10 of the county. I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably right. I think John Lujan, he's an interesting candidate in the sense that when you kind of go issue by issue, and I say this as somebody, we actually had him on our podcast this morning. And so when you kind of go issue by issue, he's pretty much in line with a lot of what his party is doing. But in terms of his style, his personality, he's a very, he's clearly a likable person. And he's somebody who's got, he's a retired firefighter. He has a business. He talks about a lot about when we talked about why he won. I mean, a lot of it is he said, people getting frustrated that things aren't getting done. So that sounds like he's someone who's advocating for more bipartisanship. When you kind of go issue by issue, it's not always clear to me like where that bipartisanship is going to be coming out. One of the things I talked to him about was Medicaid expansion, because to me, it's not even, it has been a partisan issue, but I don't think it should be. I think this is just a common sense issue that is good for the state. And the idea that we're leaving federal money on the table and more than 1 million people who could be insured are not being insured, that just seems to me like just common sense, good policy. I mean, it's just the right thing for the state. And I talked to him and he suggested that he supports it, but then said he wants to see what the actual dollars would be as far as the state contributions. So there was some wiggle room there. He's also going to have to share the ballot with Greg Abbott. He's going to have to share it in 2022. He's going to have to share the ballot with Dan Patrick. And so my sense is that it's harder to distance yourself from because we know that neither of those people are very popular in the state right now.
I've noticed it from Pete Flores, who was the former senator in that Senate district, that area, and with John, that when they put out those 4x8s, they never mention that they're Republican, and that's intentional. I think that is intentional. It's these acts of omission aren't accidental. Trust me, those 4x8 signs cost anywhere from $30 to $50 a throw. when they print out the proof, you have to sign it because there are no mistakes. There are no do-overs. And so when you approve that proof to print that sign, you approve it knowing that you leave your party label off of that. And there's a reason for that on that side of town. And like I said, like you said, John's going to have to run with Greg Abbott and Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton. And so, voters are smart. You're not going to fool them. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how this thing plays out next year as we approach the fall for the general election.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, man, we're going to wrap up, but I want to say a couple of things about you. We've sort of observed each other. I've been in politics a little over 20 years. You've been writing at least 20 years, if not longer. You probably were writing before I came onto the political scene. I know when we met, you were writing for the San Antonio Current.
Right.
Couple of things I didn't know about you, is that two things. Number one, you're a musician.
Yeah.
So I want you to tell me a little bit about that. And number two, you also, if I'm not mistaken, you went to Harvard University, correct?
That's right. Born in Brownsville, grew up at Edinburgh, and never, 2 years before I graduated, I had an older friend who got into Princeton from, a good friend of mine from Edinburgh High School. And I can honestly tell you that it was the first time I even considered the possibility that, that anybody could go to a state, a school out of state. It hadn't even occurred to me as a possibility. And we had a really, we had a really good school district, really good high school. And I had some friends who, beginning with that one I mentioned, who started, one friend went to MIT, another, we had just a small group of us who kind of thought, well, let's give this a try and see if we can get into some of these schools. And so I did. And, it was a little culture shock and never got over the weather, but it was, it was a great experience, because I had hardly been out of the state of Texas in my life up to that point. So that was really great. And as far as music, that's something I probably started really getting serious about around that time. And I always tell people, how some sports writers are basically frustrated athletes, right? They wanted to be up there, they want to be on the field themselves. I thought, well, if I can't make it, I want to write about it. I want to be around it. And I really got into journalism because I went to write about music because I was a musician. I wrote songs, I played guitar, played in bands, and I thought, well, I knew it was going to be difficult to be a big success. You want to be, but along the way, I thought if I can at least write about music and be around it, and I interviewed a lot of musical heroes of mine and so on. So I did that for years, and then really writing about politics was something you just along the way I stumbled into it. I was more of like writing about music and the arts, and then I don't know. I'm not totally sure how it happened, but I love politics. I was always interested in it.
No, well, that's great. I mean, this backstory is always important for people to kind of get a sense of who folks are, not what they see when they see your headshot and read, what you're writing, but just kind of who you are. I think that's really cool. And so maybe one day, there's lots of things. I love politics too. I love a lot of other things. I love to cook. So, maybe one day I'll when I retire, I'll open a restaurant and you can come sing, provide the entertainment,
Okay.
see how long that lasts, right?
Yeah, I think you're going to have to get a lot of complaints from your customers, but we'll try that.
Thank you for listening. If you have a suggestion for the show or an idea for a potential episode, I value your feedback. Email your suggestions to contact@TreyMartinezFischer.com. As always, thank you for listening to Politics. Everybody, welcome back. Today we're very excited. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest. This is Representative Donna Howard from Austin, Texas. She also chairs the Women's Health Caucus. She's one of our budget experts in the House, and is someone who's just been in the fight on lots of issues. Donna, it's good to see you again.
You too, Trey. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been through a lot these last several weeks. We've went through a really tough 140-day session, and you and I got to know each other and with a bunch of fellow Democrats in a Washington, D.C. hotel. I always say for a month, but Liz corrects me that it was 5 weeks. So for 5 weeks, and we've returned back for a special session, and we were dealing with lots of awful policies. But today I want to sort of focus and concentrate on the fetal heartbeat bill. I believe it's SB 8.
Right.
And so can you just tell our viewers a little bit about, what this bill is about and sort of what its purports to be,
Right.
and then we can get into a little bit of a discussion on it.
Okay. What it does say is that you cannot perform an abortion once cardiac activity has been determined to exist in the embryo. We're talking, it's not even a fetus yet. We're talking about an embryo where you can detect cardiac activity around 6 weeks gestation. But that's not because there's a heart. There is no heart, there's no heartbeat, but the cardiac activity can be picked up by one of those Doppler machines and basically translated into the sound of a heartbeat. So it's really just picking up electrical flickering. But the bill was written so that would be included, so that you're not really waiting for the kind of viability that they're really talking about here with a heartbeat, which actually does occur before the fetus is viable. But that being said, I also think it's important to note that 6 weeks gestation is actually 4 weeks of pregnancy, because we measure this in terms of the first day of your last menstrual period. So you don't really get pregnant until 2 weeks after that. And so you really, this really means that any abortion that would occur about 2 weeks after you've missed a period is no longer going to be legal. And so it's based on faulty medical science, but it gets viscerally at things that people emotionally relate to, a beating heart. And so it tugs at your heartstrings, if you will, which was its intent. But it's a de facto ban on abortion in Texas because about 85% of all abortions occur after 6 weeks gestation. And then we can talk about it more, but the really egregious part of this too is the enforcement is not the normal mechanism of going through the state court system, but rather individual private entities, anyone, anywhere who has no standing, who's not been officially involved whatsoever, can sue anyone that they believe has had an abortion after the 6 week period of time, can sue if anybody aids or abets. You've given them a ride to the abortion clinic, you've taken care of their kids, you've fronted them some money, whatever. You could be sued for a minimum of $10,000, a bounty of $10,000.
So let's break that down a little bit. Obviously, very controversial science and medicine being played out here. And I know that on the day of the debate, you went through countless, discussions with regard to how flimsy this medical science is. You've also correctly pointed out that it's not a 6 week, abortion because of the 2 week, period that we just discussed. So you have sort of this fuzzy medical science here. And then on top of that, I kind of see this end run around traditional governance. And so typically, we as state lawmakers are making rules for everybody to follow, and there's a mechanism of the state that will enforce it. So if it's a driver's license, we have the department, that issues the licenses. If we're doing something with medical doctors, we have a medical board. But in this particular instance, I think the way this law was constructed was to say government has no role in enforcing this law, because we know that would be in violation of Roe v. Wade. And instead, there was a sort of another flimsy structure that empowered private individuals to be the enforcement mechanism and gave them the power to sue anybody. So if you were the Uber driver and you dropped somebody off at Planned Parenthood, you could get sued. If you were the receptionist at the Planned Parenthood that gave you some forms to fill out, you can be sued. Not just the doctor, the medical staff involved in medical procedures, but anybody along that whole process. And that was just, to me, a blatant attempt to just really get around having, folks say, well, you're just getting in the way of making government, get in the way of an abortion, which you cannot do. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. It's just astounding the ramifications of what's been done here to totally circumvent the judicial system, to totally circumvent the opportunity for the government to weigh in and say, you are actually violating a constitutional right Right now here in Texas, those who are seeking abortion in Texas do not have the protections of the Constitution that every other state has by virtue of this law, which is stunning to circumvent the Supreme Court and our Constitution. But that's exactly the way you describe it. That's exactly what's going on here.
And just for clarity for everybody, I mean, you could even live out of state. You could be in Anchorage, Alaska, and see something on social media, read about something in the newspaper, and that person can sue, Planned Parenthood or the Uber driver. There's no requirement that you even be a Texas resident to be a party to the lawsuit.
That's correct. And plus, once someone's been sued, there's no protection for them to be continually sued. This could be constant, ongoing litigation, which obviously has had the anticipated effect, what they wanted, in that many providers are unwilling to provide abortion, even if it's kind of questionable, even if it's before 6 weeks, but it's close. I mean, they are risking their profession and their livelihoods with this threat of the most frivolous of frivolous lawsuits.
And, lots of times you and I have been in battles on many subjects where sometimes we feel the legislation is already pre-baked and it's part of a national model. The voter suppression bills that we've been dealing with, the one that is now, being sued by the Justice Department suing the state of Texas. I felt and you felt that this was a national proposal that was traveling the country trying to suppress people's right to vote. Did you get the impression on SB 8 that the fact that there was really no negotiation, no willingness to sort of change the legislation? Is this something that's sort of being cooked up at a national level and just being passed state by state?
Absolutely. And we're already seeing copycats in other states. Florida in particular has this bill going through their system. Clearly they were not willing to negotiate. They were not even willing to make an exception for rape and incest. The fact is that they are following a template that is absolutely being passed down through some national organizations that are trying to impose their agenda on citizens throughout this country. And not only were they not willing to make any changes, but the author of the bill did not have full understanding of what her bill was about. Again, I think promoting something that somebody else has developed, that she was just the front person for, but didn't fully comprehend or understand what was even in the bill.
Right, and we've been there before.
Yes.
Different topics. What's the proverbial "I'm not advised"
Yes.
response.
Yes,
that's just
exactly.
really, and that's a shame for policymaking. We've seen this voter ID. We see this in redistricting. We see
Yes.
this in women's health. That folks are out there just reading talking points, have no idea what the legislation does, and worse, they don't know the impact it's going to have on just ordinary, hardworking Texans that are going to be left with this hangover when it's all said and done.
Oh, yeah. And let me just say, and to that point, not only are we denying people who seeking an abortion the opportunity to have that constitutional right to that medical health care procedure, it's impacting those who are not seeking abortions, but are carrying their pregnancies and have complications. There is now a chilling effect on doctors intervening with those pregnancies because of the way the law is written. They feel like they could be liable if they don't wait until the mother is actually experiencing some, death type approach here, that it's some kind of a condition that is actually pushing her to the point of where she would die before they will intervene. So it's having an impact on those that want to carry their pregnancies as well. It is absolutely egregious.
And so, knowing where we are now, bad policy, it becomes law. There's always going to be a challenge in the court system. And that's what's happening here. And so I'll do the easy part, then we can talk about the harder part. There was a lawsuit filed in Austin, Texas in federal court, and the trial court judge, Judge Pittman, went ahead and issued an injunction enjoining the law from taking effect, raising serious questions of whether this law was an attack on Roe v. Wade and a woman's constitutional right to an abortion. That has been, that temporary pause has been undone by I believe the Fifth Circuit. But lo and behold, we have this case before the United States Supreme Court. And let's talk about the first piece. Number one, the Supreme Court had an opportunity to weigh in and stop this law from taking effect. And what happened without any briefing, without any discussion, without any justice putting their name on a piece of paper, and what's called the so-called shadow docket, the United States Supreme Court denied and chose not to step in and let this law come into effect. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. I'm not a lawyer, so my expression of this is going to be from layperson's terms, but probably a lot of your listeners are in my boat. The fact is that the Supreme Court basically, as you said, they just indicated this was a procedural issue. It didn't have anything to do with the substance of what was going on with the bill itself, but that it needed to just go back to the state and let the state deal with it. And I think the stunning part of that, for those of us lay people in particular, is that meant that our Supreme Court, who is bound to uphold the Constitution, was willing to look at some procedural thing as opposed to protecting our constitutional rights and putting a hold on this, a pause on this, at least till there could be more arguments presented and some actual hearings before them where we would get the facts and then make a decision. But no, they didn't even pause a button at all. They allowed those constitutional rights to be taken away and made sure that this law went into effect immediately. And it immediately had a stunning, chilling effect on people being able to access abortions.
And as one observer had noted in this particular instance in the shadow docket, that in the very same circumstance, the Supreme Court went ahead and stopped a state from having a sort of the word I'm looking for, the amount of people you could have in a church when they had a capacity limit. Mm-hmm. And the state passed a law. This shadow docket came in and said you cannot use government to infringe on the First Amendment right to free exercise of religion. So we're going to stop that law from going into effect until we fight it out. But here we are in the very same instance of another constitutional right, which is a woman's right to an abortion, that a state comes in and takes that away, but yet the court wasn't willing to say, oh, we're going to set that aside until we fight it on the merit. I think that sort of woke the country up. And in fact, from the White House to Congress to all over America, people really want to know what the Supreme Court was up to, and was this sort of a backdoor attempt to stop Roe v. Wade?
Exactly. And, I'm sure we're going to get more into that, but the fact is that they already have on their docket coming up the 1st of December, the case out of Mississippi, which is a 15-week ban on abortion. So they're already working toward that. This would be something that obviously is even more obstructionist than that piece of legislation. But, they knew that was coming. This could have been put on hold until they had that hearing, but they didn't do that.
And so, and then very recently, just kind of moving one step ahead, the Supreme Court had arguments to whether or not, Texas or, whether parties had standing to bring a case to the Supreme Court with regard to this challenge. And what I found, I definitely want to know what your observation it was from the hearing itself, but what really struck me was the argument about saying, okay, those of you who think you can just impose a civil fine and a lawsuit to get the state out of the way, what stops another state from saying anybody who sells a AR-15 will be subject to $1 million lawsuit? What if, you say if anybody who denies a same-sex marriage will be subject to $1 million lawsuit? All of a sudden, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And there was a crazy reaction. Did you notice that?
Oh, yeah. I listened to the hearing, and it was several of the conservative justices were absolutely pointing that fact out. I think giving themselves cover for perhaps saying, well, wait a minute, y'all have gone too far here. Because certainly if you allow the states to bypass the courts because they don't like something that's in the Constitution, then that's open to anything that's in the Constitution, including your Second Amendment rights or anything else. So I think that was something that we got a clear message that they are very concerned about, actually.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
the court will make a decision. The fight will continue. You know, Donna, as we close, we get a lot of feedback from viewers that always ask the question, well, what can we do to help? How can we get involved? When it comes to, you know, fighting and defending women's healthcare rights, women's choices, do you have any advice how people can get engaged in their local community or perhaps getting engaged at the state level?
There's obviously lots of advocacy groups that I could list here that are working in this area, and most of them have ways to reach out, at least through the websites, to any community, no matter where you are. Although I realize we have a lot of healthcare deserts and women's healthcare deserts in this state, which has been part of the challenge, is when you have these obstructions, it's most impactful to those who are having to travel long distances, to those who are unable to take off of work or get childcare and travel hundreds of miles to get to a clinic that is available to them. And then, of course, we have a huge issue with the Rio Grande Valley in terms of people who are undocumented and being concerned about having to cross over cross through the checkpoints. And so we're limiting what so many people can do. Certainly Planned Parenthood, VOW, there groups like that are out there. But what I will also put a plug in for is the House Women's Health Caucus, which you're a member of. We are a group of legislators who are working to promote women's health care across the board, not just with reproductive health care, but with maternal morbidity and mortality, with sexual assault, with all things that impact women's health. And to make that caucus work, we also have to have contributions. That's one of the ways that we've been able to do the work we've done. We traveled to Washington. I testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee. All these things take a little bit of funding. So we have a website, the Texas House Women's Health Caucus. I hope that people will look at that. We try to update what's going on so people can be apprised of what's happening at the legislature and can follow that. But please get engaged and know that abortion is still legal. Despite the fact that there are obstructions, it is still legal, and it's very difficult for many people. So funding of these organizations is extremely important in helping those who have limited means to be able to access this legal medical procedure so that they can be safe.
That wraps up our show, everybody. I want to thank my special guest, Representative Donna Howard, and San Antonio Express News, Gilbert Garcia. Thank you for your feedback. Look forward to seeing you again next week on Politex.